Before we begin, I want to share a resource that can make your divorce process far easier and much less stressful. It's Hello Divorce. Hello Divorce gives you a guided, step-by-step path through your divorce with clear instructions, simple online tools, and support from real legal and coaching professionals when you need it. You get help with paperwork, access to affordable legal advice, and a process that is designed to save you money, reduce conflict, and keep you informed every step of the way. They've created a special page just for Divorce and Beyond listeners. Visit hellodivorce.com/Susan to explore their plans, pricing, and resources so you can see exactly what fits your situation. If you want a clearer, calmer, more empowered way to move through your divorce, start at hellodivorce.com/Susan. Welcome to Divorce and Beyond, a podcast about navigating divorce and what comes next. I'm Susan Guthrie. I'm a divorce attorney and mediator, and for more than 3 decades, I've helped people navigate divorce with clarity, strategy, and compassion. Each episode offers practical insight into the legal, emotional, and life decisions that shape your future. So let's get started. Welcome back, everyone, to Divorce and Beyond. If you are exhausted in your marriage, if you feel like you are doing all the emotional heavy lifting, if you are secretly resentful but still afraid to let go, then this episode may hit home because today we are talking about codependency, the hidden dynamic underneath so many divorces. And I am joined by Michelle Ferris. Michelle is a licensed psychotherapist, codependency expert, and anger management specialist who has helped thousands of people break free from one-sided relationships and rebuild self-trust. Michelle specializes in helping people who overgive, overfunction, and oversacrifice finally learn how to set boundaries without guilt. In this conversation, we unpack what codependency really is, why it often starts in childhood, why it explodes into anger during divorce, and most importantly, how to stop repeating the patterns. If you've ever wondered why you keep giving more than you get, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Michelle, I am so delighted to have you here to talk about this topic. Believe it or not, in over 400 episodes, I have never done an episode on codependency. So I'm delighted. Yeah, having a wonderful expert on this topic. My listeners are very lucky because I will say, certainly codependency has raised its head in probably all 400 episodes. But we have never talked about it from a high level, and I think it's something really important for people to understand, especially as we were just talking about that so many people right now, as we tape this in divorce season, are in that space of should I stay? Should I go? Am I getting a divorce? Or I've just been told I'm getting a divorce, and this plays into that. It definitely plays into how the relationship went along and how the divorce might play out. So thank you again for taking the time to join me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited for our chat.
Well, and I was thinking about how to start this, and I was realizing as a divorce professional for 35 years, I have a pretty good idea of what I at least think codependency is, but I bet my listeners don't. Not all of them. So let's start there. When they've probably heard it, it's a buzzword, but what is codependency?
So it's basically a relationship pattern where you're over functioning in your life. You're sacrificing yourself. You are putting other people's needs ahead of your own, which ends up creating a very lopsided, one-sided relationship where you're doing all the heavy lifting. So in long-term marriages, right, sometimes they hit a wall and go, oh my God, I can't keep giving at the rate I'm giving because I've totally burned myself out. The other thing is it looks different on different people. So a lot of people think, oh, it means you can't say no. It means you're a people pleaser. But it's much more than that. And that's why I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Well, and I love that you said people pleaser because that's the first thing that rings
Yep.
into my mind
Yep.
when someone says codependency or describes it,
Hmm.
because it is about more than just people pleasing. That's,
Hmm.
I think, an element. Maybe that's like one
Definitely.
one layer of this, but it's much more nuanced than
Yeah.
that. And it's not something that develops overnight, is it?
No, typically we have these traits in starting in childhood because we learn to take care of others, we learn to negate our needs. Our family or our parents don't really have the emotional skill to parent effectively because let's face it, they don't come with a rule book. And to parent effectively, you have to be pretty emotionally secure and mature. You have to be willing to help your child develop and focus more on them than yourself. But in dysfunctional families where codependency develops, the adult's issues overshadow the child's needs. And that's part of the reason why codependency is so rampant.
Well, so this makes me think because one of the places where I started to learn about codependency was in Al Anon,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're talking Al Anon, for those who are not familiar with it, is a part of the 12-step program for those
Hmm.
who are family members or in relationships or in proximity to someone who has an addiction issue. I've spoken before on this that my father had
Yeah.
issues around alcohol. So Al Anon became a place, and I think it's probably the first place that I heard about
Hmm.
codependency. So that's sort of at a high level or an extreme level, right? But
Hmm.
I would imagine there have to be, because you were talking about, maybe a child who's parentified or taking care of a parent who
Hmm.
doesn't have the skills, but there have to be layers of it. There have to be
Yeah.
degrees, I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, that's a pretty severe degree. You are definitely going to be inundated with a lack of self, not trusting yourself, being gaslit a lot, having the parents' self centeredness and grandiosity really rule the entire home, versus maybe on the other end, you have some parents that are relatively functional, but don't know how to say I love you, don't really know how to explore and really help the child develop into who they are because they're stressed and they don't have good coping skills. So the child ends up, raising their siblings. So there is a very I love that you said that because there are varying degrees, but usually, when you develop codependency, and it does show up pretty big later in life because those relationships become our template, right? We
Yeah.
learned, okay, if from 0 to 18, I learned that I can't count and that I have to take care of or neglect myself in order to be loved, then that is gonna continue into who we pick as partners, who we pick as friends, which really creates that, toxic relationship pattern later in life, which we wanna avoid.
Right. And it's a relationship pattern that will continue to repeat itself
Yes.
if it's not interrupted, corrected, and
Yeah.
leads to that. We're hearing, it's funny, I just read an article the other day about women in midlife quiet quitting their marriages
Mm.
because they're
Mhm.
exhausted.
Yeah.
They're tired of carrying the
Yeah.
whole load of the relationship, of being
Yep.
the one to do everything. And instead of getting a divorce, they just check out. They just
Yeah.
emotionally
Yep.
detach from the relationship, and I wonder if that's a in some cases at least,
Mhm.
someone dealing with a lifetime of codependency coming to a head.
Oh, for sure, because most of the time, the other aspect of codependency is that we pretend everything's fine when secretly we're resentful. We're like, "Where's mine? I am overgiving. How come other people are giving me nothing? But the problem is that that's the point. When we're overgiving, and I had to look at my own self in this, like I'm teaching other people to do less. And that's the part we play. But most people who struggle in codependency look so nice because we're generous. We're the first people to help in a crisis. We're super reliable, but we're literally not taking our turn. So that's the part we play that is really hard for people to acknowledge because on the other side of codependency, these are the people that can be very successful in their work life
Yeah.
because they're hardworking, right? They're good
They're
with
nice
people.
people.
That's
People
right.
like them.
But in relationship, they don't take their turn. They don't speak up. They're not able to really say, ouch, that hurt. So sometimes I have a lot of people who struggle with codependency that don't see it as a problem because they're getting lots of kudos for it.
Yeah.
But secretly they're paying the price because they realize, I'm not getting my needs met.
Yeah, well, and exhaustion. It's hard
Yeah.
to do
Oh, for
everything for
sure.
everyone else and not get your tank filled.
Yeah.
And I have to ask this, and I have both men and women who listen to the podcast, but
Mhm.
this does sound like something that would land more at the feet of women to be codependent than men. And I think to me, there's like a social norms aspect to that as well. And I'm just wondering your thoughts.
That's true. I think on a whole, women are raised to be caretakers, to neglect their needs for others. But there are, I have definitely worked with men. I had one a couple of months ago where he paid for everything. He took care of everything for her in hopes that she would stay. And of course, when you do that, right, it's not a functional, lasting strategy because you're just giving too much and it sets that other person up to be dependent on you. So I definitely have seen it in men, but yes, I think the numbers are far in the woman's column for how we're raised versus a man.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this is such a topic, I think, right now
Mhm.
in pop media, et
Oh
cetera. I
yeah.
just had an episode with Kate Anthony last month, and we were talking about, that show, All Her Fault, and
Oh
right,
yes.
which what a brilliant title after I watched the show.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's all her fault, right? But so I think there are those societal norms. But you just said something that I think is really significant. I want to dive in on it because
Mhm.
I think it's really important for listeners to understand this because you said the word security, right? Like that people feel they have to constantly give because they don't feel secure in the relationship if the person's going to stay. And that's, I think, so much a part of this codependency. People give and give and give and give
Mhm.
because they don't want to be left and they
Right.
feel the earth underneath them is so shaky that if they don't do it this time,
Right.
that person might leave them.
Right. Well, they don't have a solid sense of self. So they look to others like band aids. Like, I'm just going to surround myself or get into relationship after relationship because I can't tolerate being alone, because that's where the pain is. That's where the loneliness is. And we don't want to face that. And let's face it, a lot of people who are codependent are good at connecting. So
Yeah.
they just keep connecting because they think that's the answer. And that, find your Prince Charming mentality that a lot of us grew up with is just completely bogus because again, if you don't have a sense of self, what kind of person are you going to actually attract? You're
Oh,
not going to be very picky.
no, you just want to fill
Fill
that
the void.
space,
Yep.
that the void, exactly right. That space in your life that's empty because you don't want to be alone.
And that's also the danger because often codependent people will attract people who are narcissistic, people who are incredibly toxic. And I know for me, I've noticed that, like, I haven't luckily had a lot of narcissistic people in my life, but I've had a few. And I realize it's because that childhood pattern. If we have anyone in our childhood growing up that at all have symptoms of narcissism where you are put down, you're being made to feel wrong, gaslit for your feelings, you are going to see that as familiar in your adult relationships. So even though none of us want a narcissistic person in our life, we end up getting that because their charisma, their initial love bombing, I think you're the greatest thing ever, which doesn't last long, but it hooks us in and then we're off and running.
Right. And it plays right into that don't leave me, right? You can't leave me even though you're terrible to me. And, all of these abuses happen, whether they're physical or mental or emotional. So for those who are out there listening are sort of getting that uncomfortable feeling that this sounds a little familiar to them, what what are the signs? What are the signs that they're in a codependent relationship?
So the first one is you're doing all the heavy lifting. You might be the one sending most of the texts, most of the calling, most of the inviting. You probably have difficulty saying no. So any chance to help, to contribute, you are going to jump on, even if it hurts you. Even if you have a work project due the next day, you're still going to squeeze it out and then pay the price because the relationship becomes your only source of worth and happiness. There's also a lot of unrealistic expectations here because we're super givers. So in relationship, we will secretly think, why aren't they giving as much as we are? So our expectations in relationship are really skewed. I know for me, I constantly revisit this one because it's like, you know what? People aren't going to give what I give. That's just not a realistic goal. And I've had to learn to give a lot less. The other thing is we tend to have that sign on our head that says, help me, fix me, right?
Yeah.
So, I've had people say, "Oh yeah, when I go out, strangers tell me their life story." I'm like, "Yeah, because you're open." And again, there's nothing wrong with being kind to strangers. That's not what I mean, but like I don't get that anymore because I'm very clear on my boundaries. When I go out, I am pleasant, I am nice, but I'm not going to engage someone in their childhood story. I'm
Right.
just not. That's a really important boundary. But, the other thing is if you're in a relationship that you absolutely feel like you can't live without, that's another sign because there's
Ooh,
always an addictive quality. Like, I have to have this person in my life in order for me to feel okay. Usually people do this with romantic partners, but sometimes it's their adult children. Sometimes it's a best friend. Women can have very codependent,
oh,
unhealthy
sure.
dependencies on each other. And then you may feel really in sync for a while. And then all of a sudden, one person's out and they ghost you because they can't handle that intensity anymore because it's not healthy and it's not sustainable.
That's a really good point because we are talking about this on a divorce podcast. So obviously we're talking about it in the context of marriage and romantic
Yeah.
relationships, but codependent relationships, I mentioned mine was, a result of my relationship with my father. And, you can have a codependent relationship with almost anyone who is in your life. And if you are truly codependent, you can have a lot of codependent relationships in your life. It's not like there's one codependent relationship in your life and all the rest of them are completely normal. We're going to take a quick break so you can hear from one of our sponsors. But stick around because in the second half of this episode, Michelle and I are going to talk about something that can completely change the trajectory of your divorce, and that is how codependency can quietly cost you thousands by pushing you to agree to things out of guilt or fear instead of clarity. You do not want to miss that. And if this conversation is resonating with you, I've created a companion blog and downloadable resource called The Codependent Divorce Mistakes That Cost You Thousands. It includes a divorce boundaries planning worksheet to help you identify your non-negotiables, recognize where you tend to overgive, and prepare for negotiations with confidence. You'll find the link in the show notes. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Listeners, As a bit of a product junkie myself, I am so excited to announce that we have partnered with Blue Mercury, which is your one-stop destination for luxury skincare, makeup, hair care, fragrance, and more, all thoughtfully curated and backed by their expert service. And because you are listening today, Blue Mercury is offering 15% off your first order when you use the special link in our show notes. It's their way of saying thanks for being a part of the Divorce and Beyond family. So just click the link in the show notes, shop your favorites, and enjoy the 15% discount that will be automatically applied to that first purchase. That's 15% off your first order at bluemercury.com. Check your show notes to claim it now.
That's right. And that's why, the people who are listening and are contemplating divorce, this can be life-changing because if you are codependent in the way you get divorced, in how you make decisions and how you approach your ex-partner and the process of divorce, it could be the difference between thriving and sinking. And, that's why it's so important. I'm so glad you have your podcast because people need to know that they can take care of themselves and it doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be vindictive. It can be just you advocating for yourself in a healthy way.
This is the meat here, right? Because for those who are out there who are feeling the light bulb go off, who are sensing that this sort of uneven ground is under their feet and under the relationship. So if a divorce or a breakup is in their future,
Mhm.
as you just said, it doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to
That's right.
be horrible, but it does have to be different than how you have probably conducted yourself in the relationship up to now. And you
Right.
used a word earlier that I suspect is really important. It was boundaries.
Yes. Yes, for sure. You have to figure out, okay, where's my limit? What are those behaviors that I don't want to tolerate anymore? Or what are those things I need in order to live my next best life? Because we can't expect someone else to take care of us. We have to figure out, and we have to also figure out that it's okay to even have those needs because when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, you often sacrifice those needs for other people, thinking that you may get what you want if you do that. And in a divorce, if you do that, right, you may assume, well, I'm going to be super flexible and give my partner what I think is fair. So he or she gives me what I need. And, we can't make that assumption in divorce because we don't know how the other person is actually going to play out.
Well, and rarely do they play out the way that we in our mind might think that would work out. What I hear here, though, is for someone who is codependent, who has this tendency in this relationship, as this relationship is unfolding, moving into this new process and is going to reformulate into something different, separate and apart, this person has a lot of internal work to do in this moment. And it's a hard moment to have to do this. But part of getting through the divorce in a way that is going to help set you up for that future, you were talking about
Mhm.
the beyond, we like to talk about on this
Yes.
podcast, right? But will be working to start changing this codependent paradigm as you negotiate through the divorce process. So, how do you do that in a moment where, I mean, first of all, what I heard from you earlier is the basic content of this relationship has an underlying thread of fear and exhaustion running through the relationship. So we have this person who has been living in fear and exhaustion for years in a marriage or relationship. It's now ending. I can only imagine they're now feeling even more fear and exhaustion. And
Right.
yet, what
Right.
we're saying is you've got to work on yourself to start to overcome this codependency paradigm so that you can get through the divorce. How do they do that?
Well, the first thing is they have to shift the focus away from the relationship back onto them. So for me, the missing piece was I never wanted to have a relationship with myself. I mean, I thought that was super boring. And I did. Even
I already
like
know her.
Yeah, like, who cares? Because the sexy part was, I want a better relationship. So the codependent person is always seeking that love, that approval. But if you don't have that foundation of you feeling like you can be in your own skin, feeling like you can actually like yourself and go to a movie by yourself or just chill, that's going to be the foundation for your new life. So the shift becomes, how do you start to befriend yourself a bit? And the first step in doing that is to identify these traits. Like, how is codependency possibly hurting you, so that you can say, okay, maybe in this divorce, like, I need to stop saying yes when I mean no, or I need to not answer him right away because I feel pressured. Or, maybe I don't need to say, oh, I'll agree with whatever you want because it's going to hurt me. But we have to kind of do a mini inventory of what are those behaviors that are hurting you, because that's really the beginning of any type of recovery.
Well, and it sounds to me, just in hearing you talk about it, but that the safest and probably most appropriate place to do this would be in therapy.
Yes, although I will say therapy alone is never what I recommend. I think
Okay.
therapy, outside resources, Al Anon. I think it takes a village to recover. I mean, if I had just done my therapy 1 hour a week, there's no way I would be where I am now. It was the group support. And there's so many online programs and courses and things. I mean, we're living in a society where we have so much help. So, but I would warn people, please don't go to Chat GPT to recover, because that
No.
is really, really, really not ideal.
As much as I love my friend ChatGPT, I agree with you. It
Oh,
is
yeah.
not a
Yeah.
replacement for your therapist, for, by the way,
No.
your divorce attorney or your
Yeah.
mediator.
Yeah.
No, you need human discernment in these things. But I really love, because this is a very modern approach, right? And it's something that we face in the divorce industry is people have more and more ways to get educated about the process and find support in the process. But you've pointed out a very important thing about discernment in where you get your support, where you get your information. So, therapy, I think, is probably a great start. But I
Mhm.
love that idea
Absolutely.
of, well, I personally found Al Anon very helpful,
Yeah, me
something,
too.
that you could go to and was a support that's available pretty much anytime. I mean, these days they even have that online, right? Back in the old days when I went, you had to go sit in some church basement. But now, and drink bad coffee and eat donuts. I think it was the same thing. But now these days you can do that from the your own home as well. But the other aspect that maybe I think people might need to hear is, this isn't something you're going to change overnight. This isn't
No,
something that you're going to have, you're going to listen to this podcast and go, oh, I'm codependent. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to start saying no. And in fact, baby steps are the way to get through anything.
it's funny you say baby steps, because in my I have a online course on codependency, and I end everything with, "What are your baby steps?" Because this is a process. It's not something you're gonna resolve, but that's why, if you have a support system that can truly support you, and you're gonna feel like you're not the lone ranger doing this by yourself, you're gonna make more progress. And it's actually a pretty interesting process of self-discovery to realize, wow, I really can take better care of myself and attract people who actually care about me and not want to hurt.
Well, and I think that that's a very significant part.
Mhm.
The one thing I would say to someone when they are going through a divorce and they immediately partner up with someone new,
Yeah,
to me, that's a major red flag that you might have a codependency issue. And I will tell you, that's what I did, right? Like, I was getting a divorce and I immediately started dating somebody. And then one day woke up and said, what am I doing?
right,
What
right.
is this? What is this? And went trotted my own self right back to Al Anon to work through the issues, I will say. But so
Yeah.
if you're in that space and you're so feeling so desperate to
Mhm.
fill that empty space
Right,
next to you,
right.
that might be a warning sign
Oh, for
that,
sure,
yeah, right, that the best
sure.
thing might be right now to spend a little time with yourself and getting
Yeah.
to know yourself.
And find support. You don't have to do it on your own. I mean, I would go to an Al-Anon meeting. I tend to prefer Al-Anon than Coda because Coda is not as established, and I have heard from other people, I haven't gone to Coda in years, but that it's a little more I different when it comes to the rules. They have more rules, whereas Al-Anon is really take what you like and leave the rest. It's much more broad, and it's just a more established program.
Right. And honestly, you don't even, a program, you have an online program you just mentioned, right? That is for people. Is that a place where people could start if they were looking for support in this time?
It's definitely a self-study, so for sure, they would get a lot of the skills, but I would still recommend Al-Anon for that, human, connection, for sure.
Well,
But
and there
that's the other part is that getting the right information. Because the other thing I've heard is people will go to therapy and then their therapist isn't trained in codependency, so they completely miss it.
oh,
So, I would urge your listeners, if you're looking for codependent help, please find someone who specializes in codependency. It's like divorce, right? I mean, you
yeah.
have your niche. You're not doing brain science, you're doing divorce. I mean, and you're very good at what you do because that's your niche. And that's what I really urge other people to do. Don't just assume every therapist is going to be the same because they're not.
Oh God, no. And mental health is a huge topic. It's just like the law. There are so many different kinds of law. No
Yeah,
one's an expert in every one of them. Mental health
that's right.
professionals are the same. I
That's
have
right.
to ask another question because I've seen this play out, 35 years of divorce work. People, and I want to phrase this correctly because, as I said earlier, these relationships where you've gone through a relationship in a codependent fashion, you've felt a lot of fear and exhaustion throughout that relationship, as we said. And then you start to go through the divorce, you start to get educated, you start to understand the power dynamic and all of the, what was going on. And they get very angry with the person that they're getting divorced from.
Yeah.
And I understand it. It makes sense. It's easier to blame someone else than to look at the role I think perhaps we might have had in that relationship. And certainly the other person may have done some things that are terrible or behaved poorly. But it can be very harmful to the process, both of the divorce and I think to the journey of trying to recover and set boundaries in a healthy way with that person. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that because I've seen that over and over again.
Well, what we have to do is we have to be willing to see this pattern as bigger than the marriage because
Okay.
it's certainly easy to target them and go, man, I was in there for 25 years. And there will be a lot of anger in a long term marriage like that. I'm not denying that. But we also have to look at, like, how did we play a part in that? Like, how I'm guessing those patterns probably show up in other areas too, which is why it's so intense. It's not just intense because of the marriage, it's intense because of this lifelong pattern that somebody has that is now like, of course you're gonna be mad as hell. Of course you are, because
Right.
you have 35 or 40 years of doing this stuff. So, being able to identify that it's not all about the marriage is really key.
I think that's really, such a golden nugget in this episode because anger is so common in the divorce process, right? I always say the two most common emotions are fear and anger, and they're pretty much
Mhm.
two sides of the same coin.
Right?
But in codependent situations, I have seen it as a very intense anger,
Yes.
but there's almost that level of it's easier, as I said, to direct the anger outward than not to direct it inward, but it's painful to have to sit down at times and look at the role that we might have played in getting to where we are today, which may not be where we want to be. There can be some pain in this journey. You have to
Oh, for
explore
sure.
your, as you just said, your role in it. One of my friends always says, you have to sort of, clean up your side of the street as well in doing this. And again, at a time when you're already going through the turmoil and
Right.
tornado of emotion that is divorce. So having that support system in place, which can be the therapist,
Mhm.
Al-Anon,
Yep.
support group. What about well-meaning friends and family?
It depends on how safe they are, and it depends if they understand personal growth because I don't typically share much with my family in terms of personal growth because they don't do it.
Right.
So it's not fruitful for me. They're not going to understand. But if there are family members or friends that do get it to varying degrees, you can test it out. But sometimes it's usually a matter of how emotionally safe is it for them to share because especially about divorce, man, people have a lot of opinions about what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And sometimes you're just in too vulnerable of a place to really hear that feedback.
No, I think that's such a good point, and honestly, even if they are safe, if they are
Mhm.
loving and
Right.
caring, very often they're going to say what they think you need to hear,
Yes.
or what they think you want to hear, maybe not
Right.
what you need to hear, right? And it's said out of love and support. But I think the other significant part here is going back to what you said at the top of the episode is very often these codependent relationships grow out of the relationships of our primary family.
Yeah.
And so going back and part of what you need to do, I think, in
Mhm.
examining your codependency, it was very hard for me to also have to then not just look at the relationship that I was exiting, but also look at my relationship with my father, and then my relationship with my mother, and then my relationship with my sibling, and all of that. So sometimes in these situations, it can be more helpful to find your support in other places than what we might think of as the go-to.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I wanted to go back to real quick is when you were talking about anger. Most codependent people stuff their anger for years before it actually arises in them enough. So don't beat yourself up if you notice, because sometimes it'll be really scary. Like, oh my God, why am I so angry? Now I don't even have any control over it. And I've had control over it for 20 years. That's part of the process. If you've stuffed it for 20, when it comes up, it's not going to look pretty. You're going to not have some control for a while because you're trying to find that happy medium balance, which takes a while. But I love that you brought that up because that's an important part of the recovery process.
No, well, I remember it very
Yep.
distinctly. So I thought
Me
I'd share.
too.
Yeah. So, and you know what I would say from the divorce professional aspect of that
Mhm.
is I think there's a huge value in here of hearing what you just said, right? That this big, ugly mass of rage might just erupt from you. And what I would say to you as a divorce professional is be aware of that and
Mhm.
try to protect, and I'm going to say the divorce process from being impacted by that. So, what I mean by that is it's going to come out, know that it's likely to come out, and try to find constructive ways to be able to express it without unloading it into the divorce process by like screaming at your soon to be ex, sending the nasty gram, having an argument in front of your children, setting their clothes in their closet on fire, whatever these things. I've seen them all, folks. I've seen them all in 35 years. Because in the end, that does not serve you. In the
Right.
moment, in the rage
Right.
and the anger, it may feel good. I promise you it won't when you deal with the repercussions of it in the divorce process. So set up some safety for yourself. I will tell you there was a therapist that I was seeing when I was going through my divorce, and I went through this just huge amounts of rage and all of that.
Mhm.
And she had me basically beating up pillows, right? Like just literally wailing on pillows, like whack-a-mole, but like punching. And then I started taking boxing lessons, real boxing
Mm.
lessons, where
Yeah.
I actually went in and I didn't hit a bag. I hit my trainer and I was only hitting his hands with those
Yeah, the
heavy,
pads.
the
Yeah.
pads. But man, it was awesome.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was awesome, and it's where I could get, work through some of that in a maybe not, I don't know if that's a healthy way, but it made me feel
Mhm.
a lot
Yeah.
better. And I just,
Yeah.
so the value here, everyone, is to be prepared, to know that this might happen. There's also gonna be sadness, there's gonna be heartbreak in this, there's gonna be growth for you as you go through this. You will grow, you will get empowered, you will learn so much about yourself, but change is
Mhm.
scary. and
Yeah.
change is hard. And so this is not that overnight process. Those baby steps, I think that's another one of those really valuable things is, know that every day is just one little baby step forward.
Right. One day at a time. That's all we gotta handle for
Back
sure.
to our Al-Anon, one
That's
day at
right.
a time, right? Well, I mean, there's so much here. I want people to know because you work with people. We were
Mhm,
talking about finding people who do understand codependency, are
mhm,
trained in it. That's your specialty. That is what
mhm.
you do. I talked
Yeah.
about that in the intro. How can people find out more about you? And I know you have a wonderful free gift for people. So tell people how they can find you, how they can find your resources, and about this wonderful free gift.
So my website is counselingrecovery.com, and the free resource is 7 steps to healing a one-sided relationship, which is codependent. And I definitely walk you through, like, what are boundaries? How would detachment look? What are some common signs and symptoms that you're in a codependent relationship? But it has journal prompts because for me, so much of the healing is getting it on paper and having those little ahas of, "Oh, that's what I could do differently." So this is gonna help you. I also have a YouTube channel I will definitely give you that link if you want it
Yes.
because I do weekly videos. I love doing that. It's fun to connect there too.
Oh, well, it's wonderful. This is what we talked about earlier, right? There's so many wonderful places where you can get education and support
Yeah.
on these issues that you need. And one of the beauties of a podcast is we can't fix codependency in a 30-minute, 40-minute
Right.
podcast, but
Right.
we can let people hear your wisdom, your expertise, your understanding. And you were talking about, those little moments of aha. Well,
Mhm.
I know listeners are out there and they've been hearing
Mhm.
what we've been talking about and saying, oh, oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh. And so this is where you take it next. You
Yes.
can reach out to the website. You can get the 7 steps to healing one-sided relationships. I will have links to that in the show notes, as well as the website, as well as your YouTube channel. So, Michelle, I mean, I am so glad we connected.
I am too.
I feel personally like I feel terrible that I have never done this episode on codependency because it was something that has been such a critical shift in my life over my many years. And so I'm so happy that this resource is here for my listeners. And you and I are going to get together and do a second episode a little bit later in the year. And we're going to be talking about healing beyond the divorce
Yep.
from a codependent relationship. So, listeners, more to come. You can always reach out in the interim with questions you might have for Michelle. I'll send them to her and we'll also collect them for that additional episode. But thank you so much. This is really such a fabulous resource for my listeners.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great conversation. And before we wrap up, let's talk golden nuggets. First, codependency is not about being kind. It's about overfunctioning to feel secure. If you are exhausted, resentful, and still giving more, it's not generosity. That is a pattern. Second, anger in divorce is often stored pain. If you have spent years saying yes when you meant no, that anger will surface. The key is not to suppress it, but to channel it constructively so it does not sabotage your divorce process. Third, being nice is not the same as being clear. You can advocate for yourself without being vindictive. In fact, clarity is one of the most respectful things you can bring to a divorce. And finally, if you tend to overgive, agree too quickly, or avoid conflict at your own expense, that can cost you emotionally and financially. And that's why I created a companion blog and downloadable divorce boundaries planning worksheet to help you identify your non negotiables, map your emotional triggers, and prepare for negotiations from a grounded place. The link is in the show notes. This is about empowerment, not revenge, not punishment, empowerment. And this is how you build your beyond. If today's episode helped you see something more clearly, take a moment to reflect on one insight you can carry forward, one decision you can approach differently, one next step that feels more grounded. Divorce is not a failure. It is about facing reality and choosing a healthier path forward for yourself and your family. You can find show notes, trusted divorce resources, and expert guidance at divorceandbeyondpod.com. If this episode was helpful, follow the podcast and share it with someone who may need support right now. I'm Susan Guthrie. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back next time with more clarity, insight, and support on Divorce and Beyond.